So we're back talking with Rudy Tucker on February the 4th, 2017. And the last thing we talked about was a Christmas dinner on January the 9th, 1944. And so, Dad, I want you to tell me now, you were on the way to...
Yeah, actually on the 9th is when we moved up for the jump-off.
Oh, okay.
So the Christmas dinner was the 6th or the 7th of January.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now, if I understand right, you're heading off to Bastogne. What can you tell me about that?
Well, on the 9th, it was overcast, and we ended up actually on the west side of Bastogne. We could look forward. We could see Bastogne to our front left, and almost directly across and to the front right, we could see where the Germans were dug in over there. We could see where they're the entire, I believe the entire 4th Armored Division was up on this hill where I was at the time. And we just called it, maybe I shouldn't say this, we just called it a bald-ass hill. There were no trees on it. It was just frozen snow, ice, and so forth and so on. And then it must have been about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun came out. And they, of course, before that, they hadn't shelled us too much. And there'd been Piper Cub observations going over, and the German artillery, when they saw those observation planes, they usually wouldn't fire. And anyway, we started digging in, and the ground was frozen, the ice and the frozen ground. That some of us, fortunately, was able to get an axe from a tank crew, so we could, we could dig in, and as we were doing that, and it's an unwritten rule, I guess, when two infantrymen are digging in and they start shelling, you take turns, being the one on the bottom and the one on the top. And the shell opened, the shelling began, and Red dove in into the foxhole. I came in on top of him, and I had my head turned to the left, or to my right, and the shell must have landed just to my right, my left rear, and I saw, peeping out through my helmet, I saw a sliver of shell that just fell just like a cartwheel out in the snow, and I had this sensation that it came across pretty close to my backside, and so I told Red about that. And he joked with me about it until the end of the war. He said, Rudy, you're just cracking up. And so, anyway, I guess that was a pretty close call. But we finally got that hole dug, and it became dark. Before that, this Piper Cub, between us and the Germans, there was a small copse of trees, and the Piper Cub came across it, and of course he was going to go across to where the Germans were to observe them, and some Germans opened up with a burp gun, and the Piper Cub, it went toward the German line, and it just dipped its wings down. Oh my gosh, he was hit. And behind, to our right, there was a ridge, and later we saw him come up behind that ridge, so we knew he wasn't hit. But within 5 minutes, every gun in the U.S. Third Army, getting ready for this, this jump off, fired on that one copse of woods. It just ended up with nothing but a black spot. And when I was living in Falls Church, my next neighbor was Everett Hicks, and he was a forward observer in the Third Army, and was talking about that. He said, Rudy, he said, every gun in the U.S. Patton's Third Army was zeroed in. That was the orientation point for the big jump off the next morning. So it was sort of a dumb thing to do for that, for that German to shoot up there. Then it became dark. So Red and I, between us and the Germans, it wasn't too far. I guess maybe it was 75 yards, maybe 100, not even that far maybe. There was a nice haystack. I can't remember whether it was hay or straw, but we thought that would be nice down in our foxhole. So the Germans were so regimented to fire a certain number of rounds, and then 10 minutes or 12 or 6 minutes, whatever, you knew when and they were getting low on artillery at that time, so they threw a few rounds in, and then for a period of time, we knew exactly how long it would be before they start firing again. So it was dark. We ran down there. They fired on us, and then Red and I ran down there and got this hay, brought it up, and put it in the foxhole. By that time, they began to shell us again. And so we thought, well, this is pretty good. Back on the half tracks, we knew we had our overcoats. So we went back there and got our overcoats. And we thought, well, with our overcoats and each of us having a blanket, and down in the foxhole, we didn't have it covered or anything. So I made the big mistake of taking my shoes off. And the next morning, we heard the tanks, they were cranking up, and the tanker, one of the tankers hollered out, hey, dog faces, it's time to get moving. And we got up, and I was sitting there on the side of that foxhole, and I tried to put my combat boot on, but my foot and leg was frozen. And I tell you, the cry tears almost came. And this tanker saw me, and he threw these galoshes off. He said, here, dog face, try these on. And I was determined to get my shoes, my combat boots on. So I knew in my shirt, I had 2 pairs of dry socks. So I was able to get those socks on, and by that time, I was able to get the combat boots on. And that's when we moved out, But during the night, what was his name from Maine again? Well, anyway, he went back to the half track to get our K rations for us, and the most important thing was a chocolate D-bar with the chocolate that provided the heat and the energy and so forth and so on. So he went back there, and we noticed that Trump and Stump had always had something in his pockets, and we knew it weren't hand grenades. And there he found old Stump up there with his trench knife, cutting the supper ration, the green box is open, taking those big D-bars. And Stump got another good beating there, because we really needed that chocolate bar for, to provide the heat. Lovett was his name, Lovett. So, but that morning we moved out, and with those tags, and we cleared off, I don't know what, after a while the tanks just disappeared, and we were out there, and I don't know how many towns. By the way, we was fighting with the 506 Regiment, the 101st Airborne. They hooked up with the 10th Armored Infantry. And we reached this one place where we was able to, the Germans retreated up over this hill. It was just a bare hill. And we began digging in. They refer to it as the military crest. It's sort of like at Antietam in the Sunken Road, where the Confederates were down and then the Germans had to come up. And also, I think they had us dig in there in that fashion because the Germans couldn't get their artillery. And if they had mortars, we must have known they didn't have mortars, they could have dropped a mortar right into us. But anyway, A Company was to our left and B Company was to the right. There was a road in the center. And a runner came up and asked for me, and I said, I'm Tucker. And he said, well, First Sergeant wants to talk to you. So I ran back down that hill, and then there was sort of a level spot, and the captain's Jeep was there, and the First Sergeant's Jeep was there. And the First Sergeant asked me if I'd like to be the captain's driver. And I said, no, I'm not, I'm not qualified. I'm not certified to be the driver, but I'd rather stay with my rifle squad. So I started back up that, it was level. I started to run back up to where my platoon was digging in, and the Germans, we was expecting them to counterattack. They were just starting to counterattack A Company to our left, and I was running as fast as I could. All of a sudden, I was just thrown forward. My helmet went up ahead of me, and I looked back, and there was that big black spot where that shell had hit. What happened was, and I knew somehow I knew the 22nd Armored Field was the one that was supporting us, and the gunner was trying to get the shell right across the crest of that hill, and he didn't have the elevation set high enough. So normally the shell would come in like this and explode. This came in at this acute angle, and the concussion, I guess the concussion just blew me, and I can't recall sensing fragments going over me, but it must have. So it's pretty much the story.
Another near miss.
One afternoon, or near night, and then the next morning, and and I don't know why we didn't have tanks there with it. And then now we stayed there until that night, and the 11th Armored relieved us, and we pulled back, and I remember Red, Sheffield, and me, we were so exhausted. We were, they were shelling, but all the shelling was going over our head. So he and I just dug a very, very shallow hole, got down in it, and slept there. And then the next morning, that's when the division was moved back down to Arlon, through Luxembourg City, to Frisang. And on the way down, we was in half tracks, and that's when Patton came by with the big third flags, the big authorities all had blankets on him and so forth and so on, and didn't a single guy in that column, holler or say anything. It was just silence, because everyone detested the damn guy. It was just that feeling in the 4th Armored Division. Because we knew that, I'll tell you later, how he really, really misused it. At the time, they thought the Germans were going to break through at Trier. It's an old Roman road. It's an ancient road from Germany. It leads directly into Luxembourg City. And of course, Bradley's headquarters, at the time the Bulge first started, was in Luxembourg City, but he moved out. So I think that was one reason they sent us down there. But also, the 4th Armored Division was depleted of tanks. They were about under strength. They lost about 4/5 of their tanks, as well as personnel. It was much easier to get casualty personnel as myself up to them as it is to get tanks up to them. And so we were back there for, first we went just by ourselves. It was just our platoon, and there was 2 tanks, and this it was a very, very small village. And the manure pile was out in front in the stable. And there, they really, over there in Europe, particularly in Belgium and Luxembourg, the animals are very, very important. So they keep them inside during the winter. And I remember going in, and we went in there at dark, and I took a candle and was exploring the upper rooms, and I went into the area over the stable, and I darn near fell through the floor of that. And Palmer, who was our barber, he decided he was going to have some hot food, no more K-rest. So he found it was some old, shriveled up potatoes and some apples, and I guess had Spam. I guess we must have got a can of Spam from the tankers, and we built a fire in the stove, and there we had this supper. And then the next morning, we moved to join the battalion at Fasang, and I remember those the half tracks. We had the 5 half tracks and the 2 tanks going across these open snow fields. It was just a clear, cold day. We didn't know where we was going, so we ended up in this town. The name, I think, Fasang. I can't recall how to spell it. And then they put us in. My squad was in this house up on the 2nd floor, very small room, and it had a stove. Interestingly, the stove was in a corner, and there was a bed in it, and Sergeant 2 and Ringelwich, they had the bed, and Red Sheffield and I was lying beside the bed, at the foot of the bed. Dick Lucard and Joe Lutkus, they were there. But we had to go down the stairs to get to the outhouses, I remember. And but before that, let me say something about the first night we were there. It's unbelievable. Fasang is on the road between Luxembourg City and Metz, and there was a railroad track there, and we were across the road from us was this cafe, and we went in there, and the owner was serving this. It looked like moonshine, really. It was, I don't know what kind of brandy it was, peach brandy or something. It wasn't schnapps, it was some kind of brandy. So he was letting us drink that, and boy, I began feeling, a little bit, being out in the cold and not having eaten a sufficient amount of food and so forth. I decided I'd better start back over and get across the street and get up to that bedroom. And I started out, and I saw some of the guys were so drunk, they were just down in some of us falling down in the slush there. Couldn't get across. But later, after I left, the Captain Lang and the first sergeant was upstairs reading a map, and one guy took out a Luger, a German Luger, and he started firing, and a couple of the rounds went right up through the table and through the map where Lang, Captain Lang, and the first sergeant were. So then they closed that. They said, "That's it." They closed the cafe down, the bar down.
That didn't go over so well.
Yeah.
Okay.
But back to that dinner that Palmer prepared for us. We had what we called the GIs. We had diarrhea, and everyone except Sergeant Two and Ringowitz. And Ringowitz was saying, "Well, you guys, you just eat anything." He said, "You know, you got to take care of yourself." He was the older guy. He was sort of like a big brother to us. So it's a funny thing. One night, it must have been about 3 o'clock in the morning. We heard Ringowitz, and he said, "Oh my God, oh my God." And then we realized the dirtiest place. None of us, we didn't laugh. We were afraid to laugh because I don't know what he would have done. But the next morning, I had been eating a lot of cheese. In the dinner ration, the K rations, they had cheese, a can of cheese with flecks of some kind of meat in it. So someone told me, just eat cheese. He says, physiologically, that it's digested completely, and so you won't have your bowels won't be as full. And so I was eating cheese like crazy, and so I thought I better go up to. I knew there was a medic in the town. So I decided I'll go up there and get some. We just call them plug pills. But then it started snowing, and just as I got up to the medical where the medical office was, there was a dentist outside. He had a Model T Corporal, and he had a foot-driven dental machine. And I asked him, I said, "Hey, Doc, I lost a molar, one of my teeth." He said, would you help me?" He said, "Yeah, get in a chair." And I sat there, I bet for 2 hours. That Model T Corporal would pump. It's like a sewing, a manual sewing, pump. And that that dentist would go in and get it running fast. And I sat there, leaned back with my face, and it just kept snowing. So after that, I went in, I got my plug pills, and went back to the house. Yeah. But that's the only time the 4th Armored Division, when I was with them, ever set up their field kitchen, and they set it up behind the cafe. And I remember the big pancakes, which was real chewy, real hard, and they had this marmalade, this orange rind marmalade, and they had liquefied it with water, made a syrup. And I can't remember they had. They did. They had those dehydrated eggs, which had sort of a greenish look. They had those on a big tray. But boy, those were good.
They were warm.
That's the only. That's the only. That's the only hot chow we had. We put this dinner ration in the fire and heated, and that was a kind of meat. It's like, I don't know if you ever saw devil's ham. Sure. They still make devil's ham.
Of course.
It's about the same size as our tuna fish can.
Yes.
Yeah, it reminds me of devil's ham.
Sure.
Yeah.
So let's move on now.
So
tell
then,
me about when you reached the Saar River.
Well, then we're back up on the line, and we was going to. You see, the Ur River runs between Belgium and Germany, right across the Our River, OUR River, is the Siegfried Line with the, and with the pillboxes, and then the Sure River, SURE, in Belgium or in Luxembourg, flows into the Our, and then that forms the Saar, SAUR river, and so we went back on the line, and we knew that Dietrich was where we were going to, try to get the Germans moved back across the Our River into the Siegfried Line. So, and then we pulled back, and that's when we ended up farther down. It was, I don't know whether the Saar, well, I know it was the Our. They're at Horsdorf, so in that region, And at that time, we moved back for just a day or two. We went to a mobile shower. They had this huge hospital tent, and we went in there, and of course they had it timed, how long you could be in the shower, and as soon as you got wet, you had to move out. And then took that DDT and squished it, up in your armpits and down at your crotch. And then they just threw. They didn't try to fit you with any clean clothes, underwear, and everything. But of course, we're all skinny anyway. There weren't many real fat people in the Army or in the 4th Armored Division. And then you had to, these OD shirts and underwear and so forth, and and then we went back up to, or am I getting ahead of myself? That's when we went back up to the Our River.
Okay. So how long had it been since you had a shower before?
Well, I hadn't had a shower since on that ship.
The salt water.
The salt water.
I see. I think you were doing.
Then of course we're in our helmets. We try to clean up some, and then it wasn't from there until it was at Beirut, not too far from Nuremberg later. Yeah, I'll tell you about that.
Okay.
But then we got into this Horsdorf thing, and we went up there. It was night. They went into Horsdorf. It was down the Our River from Horsdorf. And, boy, the river was really in flood state. We knew the Germans couldn't get out of there. And something really, not interesting, but a couple of us from our squad went down to visit another squad. And there we walked in this house, and they had this stove that it wasn't red hot, but it was really hot. And there they were, the idiots, they were throwing, live ammunition into it just to hear it pop. So I can't remember who I went down there with. But we went back up to where we were billeted there. But anyway, and I can't remember just when that was, but anyway, the weather turned warm for a period of time. And it was raining and sleeting, and the snow was melting, and the river was flooding, and so forth. But the first night we went up there, it was really a scary place, and it was a house that was partly destroyed, and it was dark, it was cold. Getting down there, they told us to, there was just a certain path, it was icy, and certain paths to get down to this little old town. And then we realized it was right there at the river. And we'd gotten this 10-in-1 ration. We couldn't carry it as infantry, but the tankers could. And it was a box for 10 men for one day. And in it was a tall can of of bacon, and they had this another one of strawberry preserves, strawberry jelly, and other things. And we got up there in that old house, and we opened it up, and we was tearing things out, and I picked up a can that had on it tomatoes, Bowman's Cannery, Timberville, Virginia. And that's one time the cry tears. The cry tears, I guess, when I couldn't get my combat boots on, but the cry tears, I thought, oh my God, how far away from home I am. I thought about Timberville.
Far away.
But then the next night, the only thing we knew, we're going to get to horror story. The only thing we knew that the company, now in an armored infantry, there's 60 men in a platoon, 3 times 60 is, 80, but was under strength. So we had three, A, B, and C, 3 platoons. How many men was it? It was going to get to this. They knew the Germans were there, and the Siegfried Lab is right directly across from it, and the river was really up, almost at flood stage due to this fall.
And can you tell me the lay of the land there, coming up to that river?
Well, we
a bluff, or was it a slight?
All we knew, they told us, they said, we're just going to tie this rope about an 80-foot bluff, and we were going to go down that bluff. So we walked, I guess it was, I don't know how far, through the woods, and we had to keep a hand on at that point, hand on the guy's cartridge belt in front, not to get, get a lot, so forth and so on. And it was rain, it was sleeting there, it was a mess. And we got to this, we didn't know it was an open space, we just came out of this woods, and all of a sudden, all of these flashes, and I thought that they'd taken some horse-drawn artillery and put, I don't know why I thought French. They had a lot of French artillery, and those shells would break up in slabs. That's what they were firing when it ricocheted. It cartwheeled. I went over me and then cartwheeled. So everything would be dark. And then you get up and start to move. All these flashes again. It was right in the middle of this minefield. They had these tripwires. They had these bouncing betties. In fact, the day before, the bouncing betty, you'd see it being planted, and you'd see there were 3 wire, or like stems there, and they would attach tripwires to that. The day before in the morning, I went out in the snow and I walked out and I urinated, and I looked down, and right by my right foot, where the snow had melted, there was a bouncing betty. See, they'd gotten back there, they'd been there, they had to move, this village that we were in. So I very carefully, walked back. So what was happening, when we'd get up and try to move, then it would set off more of these explosions. And there was no way to get medical attention. You couldn't get jeeps, and, there's no right where we were. And one guy, unfortunately, he must have had a white phosphorus grenade on the ring of his harness, and I guess a piece of fragment hit that and just exploded. And the medic walked by me with him, and I don't know why, but just his face was illuminated, and you could actually see it's like an X-ray. You could actually see his skull. So no way could, he could have survived. So now the Germans knew down there in down in that town that we were up there. So we had to go in the front door down the main, and the road that went down was on the north side, and it was really, really icy. And every now and then, you know, we single file into the snow, going through that mud and slush, and every now and then we'd hear old Stump, we'd hear someone go plop, and then we'd hear old Stump cuss. And we'd say, oh, Stump jumpers fell again. We didn't really realize he was carrying the Bradley automatic with the butt end up and the muzzle end down. And each time he fell, we didn't know it at the time, but we found out later what happened. But anyway, we got down, and down the road, and that's when, from the pillbox on the other side, they started throwing these flares over to light it up. And then he started shelling us. And Palmer, last I saw him, you know, it was lit up. I was lying down there along the side of the road, and he was trying to climb a tree about that big around. He just cracked up. I mean, you know, he just couldn't take it anymore. And so Stump had that bar, and so Captain Tasher said, "Bring up the bar." So Sergeant Platoon Sergeant Hassel says, and we Stump, "Okay, Stump, this is your time. There's a machine gun. It was a dumb place to have it. It was rubble, but he was right up on top of that rubble." And old Stump just lay there just shaking. And so we was telling, "Go on, Stump, go on." And then Lutkus and Lucar, they were decorated for that. Those two guys, the bazooka, they were in my squad, they were the bazooka guys. They got up and went up there, whoop, and they knocked it out with the first, and they just fired another. So we got into Horsdorf. And it was night. It was, you know, it was still dark. And in there, it's sort of funny, but old Stump, we hear him holler, "Grenade!" And we'd hear, it must have been a window, he was throwing it into it, must have been an empty floor inside. We just heard it go plunk, 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 but never go off. And finally, someone, I don't know who it was, but said, "You dummy, did you pull the pin?" Next time, old Stump hollered, "Grenade!" And we started counting. 1 banana, 2 banana, 3 banana, 4. And that time, boom, it went off. So, then it was getting almost daylight. And we saw it must have been a mill or a 3-story building that had just been, you know, shelled, what. But we saw, and it was a kartoffel or potato cellar, an arch cellar, and we saw coming out of it this smoke. It was a stovepipe that came out. It was just getting light, and so we had these German candles. They looked like hockey pucks that you know we'd gotten from it. So we followed that stovepipe in to a stove, and there beside the stove was a clean pair of German boots. There was no mud, there was no snow, there was no mud. It was just perfectly clean. And then Lovett looked over to this bed, and Scout's honor, there was a German in there sound asleep. So Lovett, he just took that M1 and punched him in the chest. He said, "Ross!" That was, you know, get up. And man, that German opened up his eyes. The next place he put it right up between his two eyes. And he got up, and how that guy, with all of the shelling and the you know, small arms fire and so forth, and grenades going off, how the hell could he have slept in? Sound asleep. So then we told him that I don't know why, that that wasn't going to let him have his boots. And by the time he got back to the medical, to an impoundment, his feet was all frostbite, and so forth. So they sent a message down that it's going to court-martial the whole squad. So, being at that time I was assistant squad leader, so I picked up Stump's some big Browning automatic, and he started hiding. So of course, we're starting to clean our weapons. I mean, you'd have to tell a dog-faced when to clean his weapon. If you had a few minutes, you took care of it. And man, I looked down in the muzzle. There must have been mud and stuff down that far in it, because he'd carry each time he fell, he just rammed into it. So stump jump. If he had fired that Browning automatic that night, it would just blown him to pieces. But then something else we found on the table, it was what it was a grenade. It had a handle on it. They could use it either just as concussion, or they could put an iron shield over it, so you had a fragmentation grenade. And this was a fragmentation one. It was just lying there on that table. And we were very leery about, about that. And finally, one of the guys, all of us got out of there. It was more than daylight then. He went in and he picked it up and he threw it over in the rubble. It didn't go off. But, we thought we didn't know where it was booby-trapped or not. Of course. Yep. Yeah. So that's pretty much the story of Horror's Indeed. Yeah. Yeah, but Dick Lucard, on one of his visits up in Pennsylvania with her, was telling me, he said, remember, Rudy, that night that we were standing there at that doorway in that rubble, and it was so dark you couldn't see. All you could hear was the river flowing, and all of a sudden these two guys came. See, our mission was to go there and hold that position for 24 hours, and the Blue Ridge Division, 80th Infantry, was going to make a river crossing there. And he said, remember that? So all of a sudden they just appeared. There they were. And you had to be this far from them to see the person. And they had this all covered, just their face was partially shown. He said, Rudy, I really think those were two Germans that were there talking to us in perfect English. Of course, at that time, many Germans had come to America and gone back over to Germany, and so we didn't know. So after we left, let's say one more thing. Then we went back to Fasang, went out into a field there that had these haystacks. And that's where we practiced attacking. They had a map. They must have known exactly. It was a bit unusual for armored infantry, I would think, maybe not, to attack pillboxes. But we practiced, and since I was certified in landmat and booby trap, I think that was the reason. The first sergeant decided that I would carry this 35 pounds of nitrostarch, which was like a bee scalp, and it was hollow at the bottom. And I was going to be the guy that went up there to that, a pillbox that with a friction primer, ignite. It was supposed to blow a hole through the damn thing. And
so you would you would actually attach it?
Yeah, I don't know how it was going to be attached. We just practiced on the haystack. I don't know how it would ever stay there. And Leskus knew they gave him a flamethrower. They never used it in practice, and they were supposed to go up and after it blew the hole through and get the fire through. And while we was doing all this, the other riflemen were firing at the slits in the pillbox. So we were trained as regular infantry. But then we went back out. We got to Echternach, the crossing of the Soar River. The 5th Diamond Division had already made the river crossing, and it was in flood state. They had a heck of a time getting a bridge, bridge across there. By the time we got there, we just rode across it on the back of those tanks, you know. Yeah, they lost a lot of men there at Echternach. And that's where Brandenburg's, there were 3 armies, German armies, that came across at the start of the Bulge. And that's where Brandenburg, and it wasn't as strong. The other 2 armies were loaded with panzers or tanks, and this was primarily infantry. But it was the same crossing, Echternach on the Saar. And in the pillbox, we can talk about, we can talk about that later.
Okay. Well, is this a good place for you to take a break? You want to take a break for a minute? And
Yeah.
a little bit?
My teeth are starting to rattle.
Okay.
That's turned off, isn't it?